Yeah, and as Christine said, I work at Perennial. If you haven't heard of us, we are a nonprofit located here in the city at South Broadway in Chippewa. And we're really all about showing folks how to make stuff with upcycled and reclaimed materials. So we really like to show you some DIY skills while talking about diverting waste from the landfill. So for our workshop this evening, I'm going to show you a couple of different styles of pet toys that we can make using a lot of what we're going to be using is t-shirt yarn. So I'm going to show you how to cut down your own t-shirts and turn it into yarn. And I will link you to a recorded video that we have on our YouTube channel in case you want to refer back to that later too. So I'll demonstrate that first, and then we're going to cover the making of a couple of different styles of toys. So I've got a couple of these really fun and colorful, what I consider like a dog pull toy, really fun to kind of play fetch with. You could also do something really similar with upcycled denim. So if you don't have old t-shirts that you want to cut up, denim does work as well. It has a little bit less stretch to it, which can be helpful. And then I'll show you a couple of different styles of cat toys as well. So we're going to make little kind of poms that are really fun for your cats to kind of play with. And then I want to show you a style of kind of like a string toy that's really fun to do with your cats too. And like I said, most of these use t-shirt yarn as the main material. There might be some other materials that we want to mix in. But first and foremost, I will show you how to cut down an old shirt into yarn. So sometimes we kind of, attend events where we get these free t-shirts and they're really cool for like a year or two. And then, we kind of have a backlog in our stuff of all these t-shirts that we don't know what to do with. And sometimes, especially if it's for a particular event that you attended, even if you give those to a thrift store, there's no guarantee that someone is going to want that. So sometimes these things end up in the landfill, even if we don't mean them to. So giving them new life and repurposing them is kind of really what we want to show you tonight. So I have this t-shirt. I already cut one of the sleeves off for a workshop I did a little bit earlier, but we'll pretend that that sleeve is still there. We don't actually need it, but you can really work with any size t-shirt here. I tend to look for t-shirts that don't have any stitching on the side. So no side seams makes for really great yarn. And so what we're gonna end up with is a nice long continuous ball of this really fun t-shirt yarn. You can make it in really fun colors because your t-shirts come in these lovely colors. And because it's that knit material, that thin knit, it's going to be really fun and stretchy. And in addition to the projects that we're making with it tonight, you can also knit with this material. You can crochet with it. You can do macrame. There's tons of projects you can weave with it. We do a whole lot with it. So it's a great skill to have just to learn how to kind of make that yarn. I'm going to try to clear up my space just a little bit to be able to show you guys how to cut this shirt down. As I said in the beginning, I do tend to look for shirts that don't have any stitching on the side. And really the main part of the shirt that's going to become yarn is what's normally our torso here. So under your armpits, kind of side to side, down to the bottom. That's the part of the shirt that is going to become yarn. So what I'm actually going to do is cut off the top of the shirt, basically like armpit to armpit. We're just going to go ahead and cut that off. The tops of t-shirts are fun to turn into other projects. You can make small balls of yarn from it. The sleeves, I kind of told you I cut off one of the sleeves earlier. We love to turn these into bulk produce bags. So that's what I've done here is just taken those sleeves and stitched up the bottom and turn it into produce bags that you can go purchase other goodies with, or you can just use them as racks, which are great for cleaning around your home. If you're doing some like automobile work, it's great to have kind of durable rags that will work for you. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and cut off, we would cut off normally both the hem of the shirt. I already actually cut off that hem on this shirt since I was working with it earlier. And again, I'm gonna cut armpit to armpit here. If you have something like a rotary cutter, which I like to think of as kind of a pizza cutter for fabric. It's just got this circular blade that allows us to cut really easily. This makes it go really quickly and really easily. But if you don't have something like that, a nice sharp pair of scissors will also work totally fine. Just be a little bit slower. These scissors in particular are fabric scissors, and I do like to keep a nice pair of scissors that's designated for fabric only. If you cut paper with fabric scissors, it's going to dull the blade. So just if you have something like that, it's great. If you don't, just work with what you have. So I'm going to go ahead and cut off this bottom of the shirt, armpit to armpit. And oftentimes you might notice I stood up while cutting. Sometimes that's easier for me to work with, but you work with whatever is comfortable for you. And I do have this cutting mat underneath because I am using that rotary cutter. I'm going to set this to the side for now and show you, like I said, this top of the t-shirt. This is the top of my t-shirt. I could just cut this into smaller rags that I can then use for cleaning up. So that's often what I'll do, is just kind of cut it into 4 little rags here that we'll use for cleaning up around our shop. Now, the rest of this, we're going to turn into a ball of yarn. You might have noticed that my t-shirt here does have a screen printed design on it. That's not a problem per se, but your t-shirt is going to stretch differently on that spot that has a print on it. So you can kind of decide after you cut your yarn if you want to use that for a certain project or not. For pet toys, it's totally fine. But if you're doing like a macrame project or a knit project, you might not like to see that. You might not like the way that the yarn stretches there. So that's totally up to you. Okay, so what I have now is basically a tube. It's continuous because, again, I don't have that stitching on the sides. This is, again, the torso, the trunk of the t-shirt. And we're going to cut lines that go almost all the way from one side to the other. These lines are going to be about 1 inch wide. So if you have something like a cutting mat, you kind of have these guidelines here. Sometimes I'll just use my fingers. About 2 fingers wide is about 1 inch. Our hands are different sizes, but it really is not too big of a deal. You don't have to be very perfect here at this stage. So I'm going to use my rotary cutter to be able to do it really quickly. But again, you can do this with scissors. If you aren't able to kind of craft along with the pace that I'm going at, again, I've got that video that I'm going to link you guys to a little bit later that shows you how to cut t-shirt yarn. So just absorb some information while you're here. We're going to do some pretty simple things after we make our t-shirt yarn. It won't be too complicated, I think. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and cut from one side to the other, but I'm going to stop about 1.5 inches short. And I wasn't standing up, so I didn't get a good pressure on my rotary cutter. So if you don't cut all the way through while using a rotary cutter, you can sever that with normal scissors. But I'm going to go ahead and stand so that I get a better pressure. And I'm going to cut, again, another strip that's about that same width. It's about 1 inch wide. It's about 2 fingers wide, and it goes almost all the way to the edge, but it stops short. We want to save about 1.5 inches, 2 inches here, because what we're going to end up doing is we're going to spiral the fabric. So I'm going to keep going all the way across. I don't have to be super duper precise here. And you can see I go pretty quickly once I have the rotary cutter here. And I like to look and see, did my rotary cutter go all the way through? That's what I'm doing, kind of pulling these up. It did. Once I stood up, I was able to get good pressure. So again, we're still attached on one side. We're totally detached on the other. So I kind of end up with like a little hula skirt here. I've got that screen printed design still on here, and we're attached here at the top. Now, this is the point where, for me, it's easiest to kind of go into that tube of the t-shirt, put my arm in there. So right where it's still attached, I'm kind of slipping my arm in. so I can see that part that's still attached. And I'm gonna kind of flatten that out on my arm so you guys can get a good look at it. And what we want to do, if I cut from this first opening here on the bottom straight up to the first opening on top, I would end up with a loop. We don't want a loop. We want to end up with one single continuous piece of yarn. So basically we're going for a spiral. So to achieve that spiral, we're going to cut at a diagonal, and we're going to go from the first opening on the bottom to the second opening on top. That's going to establish that diagonal cut here. And now I can actually cut at an angle to release from that first one that we skipped over on the top. And you can already see that I've got one continuous piece forming. Now I don't need to skip anymore. After I've cut that first diagonal, I can actually just go from what I see as the first opening on the bottom to the first opening on top and keep doing that all the way across. If you're using scissors, do your best to keep your cuts as long as possible. So really utilize the length of the scissor. That's going to prevent you from getting sort of jagged or frayed edges that might happen if you have lots of small cuts, or if you're using a blade that isn't sharp. Keeping your blades sharp is going to ensure that this ends up really successful. When I get to the last part here, I have the same thing that I started with. I can just cut off at an angle to the edge to separate that. And now what I have is just a flat piece of continuous t-shirt. Now, what's really cool is that I take that end that I just cut off and I just give it a little tug. It curls in on itself, and just like magic, it turns into yarn. That's because our t-shirts tend to be made with a knit cotton or cotton polyester blend. And because of that knit, it just curls in on itself. It's stretchy. And I want to show you, this is where my screen printed design was. It doesn't curl the same way. It doesn't mean we can't use it, but it's just something you want to consider. There it is again. So I can go ahead and stretch out my entire length of t-shirt yarn here. Just go ahead and give it a tug. And I'm in our space right now. You can kind of see in the background. This is our shop, so we've got lots of fun project supplies in the background there, things that we sell in our retail area. You can definitely buy pre-cut balls of t-shirt yarn here from us if you don't have the materials to be able to do this at home, or you can get t-shirts here as well. We have clothing swaps here every other month, so we take kind of those unwanted stained t-shirts and we turn them into craft supplies. All right, now once I have that, I can take the end, whichever end, doesn't matter, and start to wrap it around my hand. I like to do about 4 or 5 wraps around my fingers up here, and then slip it off of my hand, and then begin to cross wrap it. So almost like you're making like a little bow here. Cross wrap it a couple of times. We've got our cute little bow, and now we can kind of squish in these ends here and begin to wrap it more like a ball. So this is how we start to turn it into a ball. And we can do this pretty quickly just by spinning it. I'll just kind of keep my thumb in there sometimes and just wrap, wrap, wrap. Use my fingers to help hold that in place. And if I decided that I didn't like this part here that had a screen printed design, I could cut that off, maybe use that t-shirt yarn for that part of the t-shirt yarn for a different project. But I'm going to go ahead and use it. I don't think it's a problem for these pet toys. I think it'll work just fine. So that's how we cut one down. I've got a nice big basket full of lots of t-shirt yarn. So we'll be able to get some really fun colors in our pet toys today. Again, as many colors as you want to incorporate, that's how many balls of t-shirt yarn you're going to need. You're going to get a lot of footage out of this. At some point I had measured what the average is, and I'm not remembering that number, but yards and yards you're going to get out of this. Once it stretches, it gets pretty long. To do this first project that I'm going to demonstrate, which are these dog pull toys, and just hang in there if you're a cat person. We're gonna get to you. I just want to cover these guys first. I think this is actually still a really fun cat toy, so don't feel left out. What this is, might be easier to see on here. This is actually 2 different braided pieces, so 2 separate braids that we're then going to spin together with kind of a spinning technique. So if you have never braided before, don't worry, I'll show you how to braid. It's pretty easy, but we need to begin by cutting 6 pieces of t-shirt yarn. And we want these 6 pieces to be about 3 feet long. So each one should be about that long. It's going to shrink up a little bit whenever you braid and whenever you twirl. That's why we start really long. You could certainly adjust this to your own personal needs if you find that that's too long for you, or if it's too short for you. So I have this cutting mat here. I'm going to go ahead and take that one that we just made, that yarn ball that we just made, and measure out a 3-foot piece. Got my first one, and then I could do this for several different colors. So I am gonna do that. I'm gonna get some fun colors going on here. We'll do one that's red. And let's do one that's bright green. This will be really fun colors. This will help as you're beginning. Sometimes this helps to kind of just really see what you're doing by using 3 different colors, but you can make this all the same color. It does not have to be different colors at all. All right, so I've got 3 different lengths of yarn that are each about 3 foot in length. And I'm going to begin braiding. And sometimes when I'm braiding, I'll work with a buddy and have them hold one end, or I'll tie to the back of a chair or something if I can. If I don't have anything like that available, an easy thing you can do, just so you have a little bit of tension as you braid, is just take a book that you have in your house and clip a binder clip to it. And we can use that to clamp the beginning of our braid. Just get our material under there. And then we've got some resistance. That's really helpful as you're braiding. Now I have 3 pieces here. If you want a really thick dog toy, which I actually don't have a sample of, again, these are 2 individual braids that we're gonna do. But if you wanted each braid to be much thicker, to make a thicker dog toy in general, you can do your braid with 6 strands, but treat each pair of strands like 1. That's totally fine. Now, if you are, I kind of do this upside down. If you're new to braiding, what we're looking for ideally, well, first of all, I clamped this a little too low or a little too high, either way. I want to leave a good like 8 inches or so at one end, because we're gonna, first of all, I like to have the tassels. I also like to have space to be able to do a really big, thick overhand knot once we get our 2 braids together. So I don't like to start braiding actually until I'm, about, 8 to 10 inches down here. I could do a little knot here just to hold it in place if I wanted, and then clamp that. It does help, not totally necessary. But what we're going to be left with now are 3 individual pieces, and we're going to begin braiding them. So if you have not braided before, what you want to do is, you have this middle piece and you have 2 pieces that are on the sides. You're always going to be bringing a piece into the middle, and it's going to keep switching. So what you want to do is pull from one side, either the left or the right, and bring that into the middle. And then you're going to pull from the opposite side and bring that into the middle. And you're just going to keep repeating that. That's all there is to braiding it. So pull from the first side, kind of tug these up, and then pull from the other side. And I'm doing this kind of upside down, but I am going back and kind of tightening these up. When you're working with really long pieces to begin with, this part can be a little tricky to master at first because those long pieces are going to kind of be in the way a little bit. But I'm going to get a little bit further here and start to show you what we're working with. We're starting to get that braided pattern. And the tighter you do this braid, the neater your project is going to look in general. So as I go, I tend to like to hold really close up here and keep my tails kind of all sorted out so that I'm able to kind of see what I'm doing and pinch that really tight. So you can kind of see the difference from when I was not pinching up really close to the top. My braid is a little bit looser and it's a little bit tighter down here. It's okay if your braid changes in thickness, but ideally you want that kind of nice, tighter braid. You can also clip this to something like a ladder or something in your house to be able to hang it down and kind of braid with it free hanging, or a hook that you might have on your wall. Anything like that totally works, okay? But we want to braid all the way down to leave the same amount of space on bottom that we left on the top, which was again about 10 inches or so, 8 to 10 inches. We're getting there. And it does get a little bit easier as you get lower because your pieces are shorter, so there's less to manage. So if you're like frustrated as you began with it, like, oh my gosh, I can't maintain all these pieces, just know it's gonna get quicker. It's gonna get easier. All right, I think I'm just about where I need to be. Got about 10 inches or so left on the bottom. I could do kind of a loose knot here to hold it in place if I want. It's not necessary, but I could do this just to help hold it in place for now. Because after this, I would actually want to repeat that whole process again, because we do want 2 braids that we're going to bring together. I'm actually going to cheat a little bit so that you guys don't have to watch me braid on camera again. And I'm just going to show you, I'm going to take apart one of my other toys, and I'm going to show you our next steps with the braid that I already had finished. These are pretty easy to get apart. This is a thinner braid. I cut this yarn much thinner, so these two will make an interesting pair. But I've got 2 braids, and I want to begin by bringing them together. So as I said, on that first one, I did a loose knot, which was not necessary. But I want to match these up and go ahead and pinch them together and treat them as one material. So we want to do what's called an overhand knot. That just means that we're bringing all these materials together and knotting them around themselves. So I've pinched them together in my hands, wrap it around my hand to make a loop, and then pull the tail of both of those through itself and just tighten that knot up. You see how it really shrunk here? Now our tail is much shorter. That's why I have you start with a nice long tail to begin with. And now we're going to do a technique where we spin or twirl our yarn. And you might think it's like, oh, I just twirl these together. but it actually won't stay twirled if I just kind of do this, spin them together and try and tie a knot. It's not going to stay spun around each other. To get this really nice, tight twirl that stays together really well, we have to kind of create some tension or resistance within the piece. So what I'm going to do is take whichever piece of yarn is closer to the back, and I'm gonna twirl 2 times with my finger to spin it backwards and then pull it forwards. And now I have a new piece in the back, and I'm gonna twirl 2 times with my fingers backwards, so away from my body, and then pull it forwards. So I'm gonna do that a couple times and then show you what that does. That creates our twirl, and they tend to actually just stay in place. Even when I'm not holding it, you can see it's not unraveling. It's not untwirling. That's because we have that rotation backwards and then the pull forwards. It prevents it from untwirling. So a backward spin, pull forward. I'm going to kind of adjust my angle and see if I can kind of show you from my perspective what that would look like. So I've got this held in my left hand. I've got this piece in back. I would take this piece in back, twirl 2 times backwards away from my body, and then pull forwards. And now I have a new piece in the back. So I do that to that one. Twirl, pull, twirl back, pull forward. We want that twirling tension to really end up back here. So don't hold it way out in the back. You want to do that twirl right up where the action's happening. That's what's going to make this piece successful. So I'm getting there, got some really fun colors going on. And really, I feel like no matter what colors you do, this is gonna, it looks really cool. And you know, your dog won't know either way. So I did my braids 2 different lengths. So one of my braids is kind of running out of material. No worries, I can go ahead and do a second overhand knot and tie these 2 together. Undoing that first knot. So right where these meet, pull them all together around my hands, create a loop, and then pull their tails through their own loop. We've got an overhand knot, and we've got a twirled pet toy. Now, as I noted, you can definitely use denim instead. This one is not a twirled denim. This one is just a braided denim with some kind of fringes. Denim is going to be a little stiffer, so it's going to be a little bit more tricky to twirl. You're going to need to work with longer lengths and cut it into pretty thin strips. So 1 inch or less for sure. And it's very easy to make several of these with this technique. Now, if you kind of get really, if you have a really, really big dog and they are really rough on their toys, you can do actually a macrame technique instead. If you look up square knot or half square knot, you'll find video tutorials. I'm not going to show you today because I'm going to move on to cat toys, but this one doesn't have the same kind of stretch that these do. The way that this stretches when I pull it, the macrame really doesn't. It's much stiffer. So this could be a good technique for you to try out. But hopefully this is a good start for you guys to work on your dog toys. All right, so I want to move on now to show you a couple of different techniques for pet toys. And the first one I want to show you is for your cats, just making some little pom pom balls. This is very, very easy, doesn't require a whole lot of skill, but cats really love it because it has a nice weight to it, but it's also easy to kind of flip around. And you, again, are going to do this with t-shirt yarn. And if you've made a pom pom ball before with yarn, pretty similar. There are kind of templates that you can make to make making t-shirt yarn pom-pom balls or making yarn pom-pom balls easier, but to avoid making a template, I like to just use my hand. So I am going to begin with the tail of one of those pom-pom balls in between my thumb and my palm, and I'm just going to wrap it around my hand about 20 or so times. Wrap it kind of loose. I actually stopped at 15 because it was feeling really, really thick. Depending on how thick your t-shirt yarn is, you might not need to go to 20. I've had some really thin ones that really didn't fill out in the way that I wanted. So I wanted to make sure you guys got a nice thick ball of yarn. So I just went ahead and cut that off. And now I've got just a little bundle of this t-shirt yarn. I want to cross wrap it, similar to how when we were making that t-shirt yarn ball initially, I told you guys, hey, kind of think about it as a bow. We're gonna do the same thing here. So I'm gonna cut off a piece of t-shirt yarn. This is not too long, this is less than a foot or so. And I'm just gonna tie a really tight double knot right in the middle. Try to land as close to the middle as you can so you can kind of stop and position it and squeeze, squeeze, squeeze right there in the middle. That's pretty important. And then do a double knot here. We can cut these off so that they match approximately the length here. And now to finish off this pom-pom ball, where these tops of the loops are, where they start to kind of curve down and go back towards the other side, you're just gonna take your scissors and you're gonna separate those. And as you do that, you're gonna see that these little guys kind of come apart. That's great. That's what's gonna give us our pom-pom ball. We're gonna do this on both sides, cutting through all the loops. Now, you're gonna need to do a little cleaning up once we get it all cut because some are gonna be longer, some are gonna be shorter. You can kind of go back with your scissors and cut them to length to make it look the way you want it to look. But just do that on both sides, cutting right through the center, down through those loops. And like I said, you can make, there's basically like little templates you can make that look like the letter C for these pom-pom balls that make it really, really easy to do. And it's something that you can do with regular yarn too. It doesn't have to be t-shirt yarn. I just really like to show you guys ways to reuse in your own house. So I'm kind of going back and giving it a haircut now. Any pieces that are kind of sticking up way too far, I'm kind of cutting back. And I could, this one's pretty big right now, but I could keep cutting it back more to make it a little bit more petite, like this one is here. But that's really all there is to it for making a pom-pom ball for cat toys. Now, the other cat toy that I wanted to show you guys how to do, ooh, where's my pieces at? Is, this one is made with, again, t-shirt yarn. I grabbed a little wooden spool here. You could certainly use a sewing spool. I'm gonna show you guys on my next one how to do this with a cork too. And then it's just another long piece of t-shirt yarn attached to some kind of handle. I used a wooden handle with a screw eye here for this one. Grab what's already in your house. Chances are you have something that's kind of stick-like. Again, you could go out to your yard and you could grab an actual stick and use that, and that's totally fine. But just know as you kind of play with this, it's gonna get a little tension from your pets. They're gonna kind of tug on it. Cats like to kind of play with what's dangling in front of them. So just know there's gonna be a little pressure on there. Now, this one, I grabbed something a little bit more quirky to kind of give you guys some more kind of reuse inspiration. There was a damaged chair in our alley that had a lot of really cool spindles, a lot of really beautiful spindles, but the chair itself was kind of falling apart and beyond repair. So I'm gonna actually use this as the handle for mine because it's gonna be really strong and structural, also really comfortable to hold. It's got this really lovely ergonomic design. And I've just went ahead and put a screw eye into the top. If you're not familiar with what a screw eye is, let me take one out of my cork and show you. This is really great for this type of cat toy. It's just got a little, it's a hardware piece that has a little loop opening on the top and then kind of a pointed end on the other side. So the way this works is as long as we have some type of starter hole, which you can kind of use a hammer and nail, you can use a drill, you're able to just kind of twist your screw eye into place. You can do this by hand, or if you have a pair of pliers, like this will help you to just twist that right into place into your material. Again, I had kind of a hole that was drilled as a starter hole, so mine goes in pretty easy. You could use, like I said, a hammer or nail to poke that hole. This is going to give us a place to attach our long string to our handle. Now, I've seen folks try to do things like hot glue it or something like that. That really won't hold up. That's not going to hold up to your cat playing with this and kind of tugging at it. So I strongly recommend going to the hardware store or finding some cool things that you might see around your house and grabbing a screw eye. That's going to be super duper helpful. The string that you attach to this piece should be at least 2 feet long. You can kind of play with this and determine what's a good length for you to sit and play with this for your cat. But once I have that cut, which I did go ahead and cut this one is, well, this one's about 26 inches. I can go ahead and put that through the loop on my screw eye here. And then just tie a double knot here to that screw eye. It goes through really easily. And I could go back and cut this piece off. And on the other end, that's where we want to add a little tassel and a bit of counterweight. So something that's going to help that kind of float down. So for this one, I'm going to use a cork. Now to use this cork, I'm also using screw eyes here. I'm going to put a screw eye in both sides. If you're using a cork, you really don't need to pre-drill this at all or poke a hole. It's going to go in really, really easy and go all the way down. I'm just twisting that in by hand. And now we want to cut some short pieces to become our tassel here on the bottom. Those pieces are just going to go loop through that screw eye and hang down onto themselves. So I went ahead and cut several pieces. This is about 15 inches long. 12 to 15 inches long is great for this. I'm going to take the first one and just poke it right through that screw eye, similar to how we did when we added this to our handle. And I'm just going to center that inside my screw eye here and get my second one in. Now, once you start adding other pieces, it does get a little bit trickier to add into your screw eye because there's more bulk in there. So I do like to have something. You could use like a sewing needle. I have a bamboo skewer handy. This is going to help me to just kind of poke this through the middle here. So I just use that to poke that through, and then I'm going to center that string up again. And I'm going to do a third piece. I really start to push it here with how much I can fit inside this screw eye, but this bamboo skewer really helps to be able to poke that through. And then I can kind of grab it here. There we go. I got it through. All right, so center that up. And now we want these to hang down and form a little bit of a tassel here. And I could leave them kind of just hanging as they are, but I often like to do a little tie right underneath that screw eye just to help hold them in place because your pets are going to be tugging at them. So I'm going to cut off another small piece of t-shirt yarn. Doesn't need to be big, 6 inches or so is great. And right below that screw eye, I'm going to go ahead and tie these together just with a little double knot here. Nothing fancy is needed. You could do a binding technique called a gathering knot here if you want this to look a little cleaner. But that's really all that's needed for this to hang down. And now, since we have a screw eye on the top as well, we can go ahead and pull the other end that's attached to our handle through that screw eye and tie that off. All right, and then we've got our kind of dangly toy. This is a fun one for your cats. The last toy that I wanted to show you guys is good for a dog, ideally, but it's taking some either fabric scraps or denim scraps and just turning this into a nice chew toy. So I have some denim here that is just stitched into the shape of a bone all the way along the outside. And then on the inside of this, I tend to actually save my fabric scraps from whatever project I'm working with. This is stuffed with fabric scraps so that you don't have to go buy like that polyester filling or something icky from the craft store. Again, you can use what's around you. If you're making some of those pom-poms, you're going to generate scraps like this. This makes great stuffing material. Anytime you're doing some kind of small sewing project that needs filling, any sort of plushie or something, fabric scraps are really wonderful for this. So I've got a pair of old denim jeans. They're kind of stained, torn. Sometimes they get beyond repair. A lot of times you can repair them, but if you do have a pair that really has kind of suffered, we're able to turn that into a toy for your pets. So, you know, when I did this, I just free-handed a bone shape, and that's what I'm going to do again. But if you want to be more precise, a lot of times I'll just go to like a Google Images if I need to kind of get a template for something. And you can trace kind of right from your screen, holding a piece of paper up to your screen and kind of trace what's on there. But I'm going to do this kind of freehand. I'm just using a pencil here because I can see it pretty well on denim actually. But chalk, if you have something like chalk or a marker, also works great. There's no rules here. I'm just using my old bone as a template. And we're going to need 2 layers of denim cut. You can kind of see that on Zoom. So I can actually leave the jeans folded as they are and cut through both layers at once so that I get these 2 pieces that are the same size, same size. If you have something like sewing pins at your home, that does help to hold the material together as you're cutting and as you're sewing it. Denim, because it's woven with this sort of diagonal pattern, stays together pretty well even without it. So it's not a huge deal if you don't have something like that at your house. But you could also use something like a clothespin or a binder clip as well. Get that denim extra out of the way. And I did not flip this inside out because this is a toy that we're just stitching from the outside. We're not turning it inside out. Denim is pretty tough. You can absolutely do a toy that you flip inside out and sew it with right sides together and then turn it inside out. But for this particular project, we're keeping it easy and just stitching it like it is. So if you wanted to do something like this, you would need a sewing needle. And I like to sew denim because it's so thick. with embroidery floss, because it's also equally thick, you could, if you have a machine, you could use like a heavy duty sewing thread, or you can, even if you don't have a machine, you can do that. But if you're gonna use embroidery floss, just make sure you have a needle that has a wider eye, a larger eye here, to be able to fit that thick material through. I'm gonna cut my embroidery floss at a little bit of an angle. Get it wet. I just got that wet with my mouth. And then I pinch the threads flat between my fingers. Because embroidery floss is composed of 6 individual threads, it can be tricky to thread a needle because they won't all want to go through in the same way. So that's why I do like to try and pinch it flat. And if you don't get a nice clean cut, try again. My cut wasn't perfect, so I'm gonna go ahead and give it another shot. That time it went through much better. You don't need to double over your thread if you're using embroidery floss because it's already really thick. It's already really, really nice and structural. Oh no, I grabbed some floss that someone was already doing something with actually, so it's got a weird goofy knot down here. So I've got to start back over. That's my bad. But like I said, you don't need to double your embroidery floss over because it's got those really nice six threads that's going to make it really structural. So I like to have a short tail and then a really long tail. I don't tend to like to work with more than 2 feet of yarn at a time, or embroidery floss at a time. And I need to do a knot on one end of my floss. So I'm going to go ahead and do a nice sturdy triple knot here. I saw Christine come. We're still doing okay on time, it looks like. We got a little bit of time.
Yeah, so one of the attendees raised their hand, and
Oh,
I was
sure.
just going to see if they had a question. Timo,
Absolutely.
do you have a question, Timo?
I do not. I bet that I hit that by
Oh,
accident.
that's
Sorry.
fine. I saw it happen a couple times, and I just wondered. Nope, that's fine.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
We'll continue on.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. Yeah. If you guys do think of any questions, I do want to save a little bit of time for questions. So I'll kind of just power through. I know I'm packing a lot of information in here, but I really wanted to be able to show you guys many, many different pet toys that you can make here. So I often, when I'm threading my needle, I did a knot on one end. I'm sorry, I was kind of distractedly just getting to work, but I like to hide that knot if possible by doing it in between the layers that we're going to sew together. And now I'm just going to do basically an up, down running stitch that's going to stay about a 1/4 inch from the edge of what I'm sewing. And yeah, we're just gonna kind of hug that edge there. So I just kind of moved my needle down from one side to the other. In terms of the length of your stitch, you can kind of decide whatever you want to keep that. I like to kind of use my stitch decoratively for this toy, so I kept some pretty wide stitches. These are between 1/4 of an inch and a 1/2 inch. They're not quite a 1/2 inch long. That would be kind of on the big side of what you want to do. I'm doing it a little bit smaller this time around. I'm probably not going to make it all the way around in time for the end of the class, but yeah, we start to kind of get that pattern. We're just going to keep stitching all the way around the outside until we have a space of about 2 inches left. At that point, we would add some fluff or filling in there just to finish that toy off. And I can show you how to do a finishing knot as well. So maybe while I'm kind of just stitching on screen, if there were any other questions that came up, I'm happy to answer that, because from this point forward, there's really no new skills that I have to show you guys. Really, we're just gonna keep stitching. Looks like nothing's come up so far.
I don't see any other questions so far.
Okay. Great. Well, that means it was very clear. You guys understood it. I hope
agree.
that's what that means at least. Sometimes I can't tell. Is it a good sign or a bad sign when they don't have questions? Oh, yes, can you do a blanket stitch? Absolutely. Yeah. So since I'm probably not going to have time to finish this anyway, if you've never done a blanket stitch, it's a decorative stitch. I'll go ahead and kind of show you what that looks like. I actually, for this one, it would be better if I had an overhead camera for a blanket stitch. I don't have an overhead camera, so I'm going to kind of do a weird angle here. But we'll pretend that I don't have this style of stitching over here. If I wanted to do a blanket stitch, what you actually do is you come in kind of in the same place that you would want to as we're doing our running stitch here, and kind of wrap around the outside. Oh no, I got a little knot here. I was moving my piece around too much. Well, I might cut that off and show you guys a blanket stitch on a new piece here. Let's start over. There we go. So for blanket stitch, maybe I'll do that over here so it's a little bit less tricky to see. I can start similarly where I would want to go in. Sorry, I know I went off camera there. Where I want to sew close to the edge here. And you can see it kind of wants to wrap around the edge here. As long as my needle kind of catches this part, I'm going to get kind of more of a decorative stitch here. So what I usually do is make sure my needle goes just on the top of what I'm stitching here. It's going to cause this part to ride along the edge, and I could just keep doing that all the way along. Mine's really wide here. It's not the most beautiful blanket stitch I've ever done, but it's one way of adding kind of a decorative touch there on the end. Okay, I know that was kind of a crash course. Kathy asked, please remind me of the 2 ways to make a heavier dog toy. One was macrame. The other would be, so instead of doing 3 strings on your first braid, do 6 strings and just treat each pair of strings as one. So then this ultimately is 2 braids that are twisted together. So 6 total strings, you would just have 12 total strings. So that just makes it really, really strong. The macrame here, this is a sample of the macrame. There's something called a square knot and a half square knot. I'm not at the moment remembering which one makes the spiral. And I think that one's just a square knot. And then a half square knot is like a flat version of that. So yeah, typically I'd like to get something on our YouTube channel that demonstrates that, but we don't have that at the moment. But you can typically find some kind of easy instruction on YouTube for square knots and half square knots. Absolutely. Are you coming up with any other questions? Cool.
Excuse me, how long are the tassels, the piece that you cut for the cat tassel at the end?
Yeah. So anywhere from like 12 to 15 inches is ideal so that it kind of hangs down and is fun to play with. If you find that that's a little long, that's kind of what I did on this one. You can, of course, trim them up, but I think you get a lot of nice movement by leaving it a little bit longer. When you trim it short, it's going to kind of be a little stiffer. It tends to have a little bit more, like I said, movement that the cats are really drawn to if you leave it a little bit longer. And I think, I've done this before where folks came up with kind of other, adding like bells or something like that. You can absolutely add things like jingle bells or something that are a little bit funner to play with. So I really, really love those kind of fun touches that you guys can put on it. Whatever you have, work with it. Well, that is all I have to show you guys for today. If you decided to embark on this one, like I said, you would just kind of keep stitching it and then fill it with some fabric scraps or whatever kind of fluff you might have in your home. And then just stitch it closed once you add that fluff in there. But not too much to it.
Great. Does anybody else have any more questions? I've got to say, as someone who works with fabric, I've always wondered, yet I've never looked up how one kept it taut when you did that twirl, the first two
Oh,
twirls
yeah.
you did.
Mhm.
So learning that technique, it was like, oh my gosh, of course, that's so awesome. So yeah, I
Yeah.
really appreciate that.
And you can
Learning
use that same technique with just like thin fabric scraps. Like if you have cutoffs from a project that you're working on. And I like to use that as like twine for gift wrapping and stuff too.
Oh yeah.
And it looks
Mm.
really, really cute. I've used it on like wreaths to make cute little spirally bows. So it's a really good skill to have in your back pocket because there's, again, a lot of uses for it. So.
Very cool. And do you have any upcoming classes or do you want me to, yeah.
Forgot I said, and I always say, I'm going to link this and I have it pulled up. I'm going to link you first to, that is our YouTube channel. So we've got all kinds of free tutorials on there, and then I'll link you to our website as well. And that does have most of our summer classes posted. I'm still working on getting a lot of the later summer ones posted. But yeah, you'll see lots of great options on there. We're doing a mix of virtual and in person, socially distanced, masked workshops. So whatever is comfortable for you, I'm sure there's a good option. So
Wonderful. And I'll be sending out, I can send out after this, I'll send out tomorrow an email with the links to the YouTube, to the website. So don't worry if you can't get them down now. As well as a short book list of DIY books that the library carries.
ooh,
Lots of books
awesome.
on, yeah, DIY projects and sewing and fabric. So look out for that. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight, Tara. Great
Yeah,
project to learn. And it's Earth Day, so happy Earth Day.
it is Earth Day. I'm sorry I did not say happy Earth
Yeah, I didn't, I just slipped past my mind as well. But
Day.
thank you all as well for supporting library programming and for being with us this evening. So
Yeah,
thanks.
yeah.